Hi, welcome to Myers ASMR. Thanks for being here. I was thinking about you, and now you're here. Relax. Relax. Let all your stresses go. So we're going to talk about some jazz. But first, I want to take one of my vitamins. This one is spirulina. Oh, the tea. What kind of tea is this? Oh, it's actually a blend of, I put a tea bag of Republic of Tea's vanilla almond tea bag and an organic green chai tea bag. Because I just love tea. And that one was unsweetened and it tasted just as good. Well, let's see where we left off with our jazz study. Alright, I'm going to have to take a wild guess here since I didn't put any markers like I usually do. That was weird. Alright, well, let's just start with Lester Young. The Basie Band would have been important if all it had done was to introduce the world to the magical Lester Young. The tenor saxophone was Young's primary instrument, although he did not play it in the brawny, aggressive style that Coleman Hawkins had created. Young's lighter tone, which bore the marks of white saxophonist Jimmy Dorsey and Frankie Trumbauer, and his oblique manner of phrasing seemed otherworldly in comparison, and had led him to a disastrous experience in 1934 when he briefly replaced Hawkins in Fletcher Henderson's band. Musical and cultural influence. Kansas City and the new Basie group were more welcoming, and by 1936, when Young made his first recordings in a small group called Joan Smith Inc., the jazz world was better prepared to absorb his discoveries. Through featured recordings with Basie, several immortal sessions in support of Billie Holiday, and the Kansas City 5 and 6, titles that featured his clarinet, Young became the most unique and influential solo voice since Armstrong, an eccentric individual who coined his own vernacular and carried himself with an air of aloof indifference. Young was also the prototypical hipster, and his personal affectations had a profound influence on the subsequent Beat generation. It was Young's music, however, that made the greatest impact, anticipating the modern sounds that would shortly follow. Harbinger of things to come. Other visionaries were at work as the 1930s ended. Pianist Art Tatum, as elaborate in his conception as Young was terse, presented another array of possibilities. Tatum's solo recordings revealed a technique exceeding that of most great concert pianists. A highly refined keyboard touch and a sophisticated sense of harmony. They both summarized the approach of Tatum's idol, Fats Waller, and revealed a new realm for the improvising musician. While no one could duplicate Tatum's keyboard virtuosity, his rich harmonies and ability to improvise at supersonic tempos suggested much of what jazz would achieve in the near future. Other new sounds in the air included the polyrhythm of drummer Kenny Clarke, The angular leaps of trumpeter John Dizzy Gillespie, the penetrating sound and riff bass ease of electric guitar pioneer Charlie Christian, who joined Goodman in 1939, and the unprecedented mobility and tonal strength of bassist Jimmy Blanton, who was added to the Ellington Orchestra in the same year. Musicians would declare that God is in the house when pianist Art Tatum arrived at a jam session. Charlie Christian died young but lived long enough to popularize the sound of the electric guitar. Jazz gets serious. Such innovations were timely since jazz was turning the corner from its status as novel, popular fad to serious art form. Carnegie Hall bookings and the emergence of several independent record labels with a jazz focus were signs that the music was beginning to be taken more seriously. By the end of the decade, younger artists were ready to take the music to new places. Paul Whiteman had tried to effect jazz transition from fad to art form to make a lady of jazz, as the cliché has it, in a 1924 concert at New York's Aeolian Hall. That event included both the ODJB playing Wang Wang Blues with the White Man Orchestra and the premiere of George Gershwin's jazz-influenced Rhapsody in Blue. Yet, it was Benny Goodman who made the point more effectively in 1938, when his first Carnegie Hall concert was built around a mini history of jazz, with assists from members of the Ellington and Basie bands. A second sequence of influential Carnegie Hall concerts, Spirituals to Swing, began in the following year and took an even more inclusive view by placing gospel choirs, country blues singers, and boogie-woogie pianists on the same bill with Goodman and Basie. Among Goodman's achievements was the presentation of jazz in the concert hall. Independent record labels. A few pioneering entrepreneurs were intent on documenting the small band music that had been eclipsed by the popularity of swing orchestras. Many of these producers considered big bands less than authentic in the jazz realm and dedicated themselves to recording the music in its purer setting. Most could not afford to pay large ensembles in any event. Milt Gabler's Commodore label, launched on the morning after Goodman's Carnegie Hall debut, began with an emphasis on such white Chicago musicians as Eddie Condon and Pee Wee Russell, who had never been comfortable in big bands, then expanded its reach by also taping young Hawkins, trumpet star Roy Eldridge, and other important black musicians. Alfred Lyon's Blue Note got its start in the wake of a Spirituals to Swing concert with extended performances by boogie-woogie pianist Albert Ammons and Meade Lux Lewis, then moved on to small band recordings by the still elusive Sidney Bechet. Must know, although jazz had been the subject of serious documentation for less than 2 full decades, it was already experiencing its first revival by the end of the 1930s. Other imprints, like the Hot Record Society, HRS, were created to reissue obscure titles from the previous decade. The larger Columbia label followed suit in 1940 when Yale College student George Avakian persuaded executives to return Armstrong's Hot 5 and Hot 7 classics to its catalog. At the same time, trumpeter Muggsy Spanner demonstrated the ongoing viability of the early jazz repertoire in 1939. Bluebird recordings by his ragtimers and authors Fred Ramsey and Bill Russell introduced the world to the man they claimed to be Armstrong's progenitor, the then inactive Willie Bunk Johnson, in their book of the same year, Jazzmen. The next wave. The preference of many popular bands, especially those of Tommy Dorsey and Glenn Miller, for more commercial arrangements that emphasized sweet vocal choruses would lead to a deep emphasis on rhythmic power in popular music. A harbinger of this change, though one who in time would prove capable of swinging quite effectively, was the young Frank Sinatra. Still, relatively unknown when he moved from the band of Harry James to Dorsey's more successful group in 1940. Changes of a far different order were promised when Charlie Parker, another product of the heady Kansas City milieu, discovered a provocative new way to approach rhythm and harmony while jamming in the kitchen of a Harlem restaurant in 1939. These sounds announced that swing, which Armstrong had made the lingua franca of American music, had not been depleted by the swing era, although the directions that jazz was poised to pursue would not always remain identified with the term. Charlie Parker was poised to take jazz beyond the swing era as the 1930s ended. Want to know more? The songs listed below, along with the musicians or groups who performed them, are some of the highlights of the era. And I'll show you. I'm not sure if you could really read that like that, so I'll read off a few. Let's see. If you want to know more, here's some songs and groups, some highlights of the era. Louis Armstrong's Ain't Misbehavin', Cornet Chop Suey, Heebie Jeebies, Lazy River, Potato Head Blues, Stardust, Struttin' with Some Barbecue, Weatherbird, West End Blues, Mildred Bailey's Rockin' Chair, Count Basie's Blue and Sentimental, 1 O'Clock Jump, Sent for You Yesterday, Swingin' the Blues. Let's see, let's jump around. Duke Ellington's Orchestra's Black and Tan Fantasy, Caravan, It Don't Mean a Thing, Mood Indigo, Reminiscing and Tempo, Solitude, Benny Goodman's Body and Soul, King Porter Stomp, and Sing Sing Sing. I really love Sing Sing Sing. Billie Holiday's All of Me, Fooling Myself, and Strange Fruit. Let's see, Bessie Smith's Backwater Blues, St. Louis Blues, Mamie Smith's Crazy Blues, Art Tatum's Tea for Two, Tiger Rag, Fat Waller's Ain't Misbehavin', and Honeysuckle Rose. William Chick Webb's Stompin' at the Savoy. Okay, we're up to chapter 3. Bebop, Hard and Cool, 1941 to 1960. The decline of the big band and of jazz's status as popular music was precipitous. When the 1940s began, the creativity and commercial success of Benny Goodman, Artie Shaw, Duke Ellington, and Count Basie appeared beyond challenge. Yet when World War II ended in 1945, the big band era was clearly waning, and swing music appeared passé. Ways of life were changing, and the music was changing as well, along a variety of paths that made questions of what was and what was not jazz knottier than ever. What killed the big bands? People began to speak of the orchestras that remained as dinosaurs. By 1946, when Goodman, Tommy Dorsey, Harry James, Les Brown, and Woody Herman, the last at the peak of his innovative influence, all gave up on the road and on the maintenance of permanent ensembles, it was clear that an era had passed. Even without considering the developments of new musical styles, we can identify several factors that worked against sustaining the public's passion for swing. The war took numerous significant musicians out of circulation, including Glenn Miller, who sustained his popularity by leading an armed forces band in Europe until a plane in which he traveled was lost while crossing the English Channel in 1944. Those bands still touring in the United States had to face gasoline rationing, a shortage of vinyl, the imposition of a new cabaret tax that impacted live performances, and what amounted to a quarantine on new 78s. Meanwhile, in the summer of 1942, the American Federation of Musicians, in an effort to secure royalties, declared a ban on the recording of instrumentalists. Singers who were not members of the AFM continued to turn out new records, often accompanied by vocal choruses rather than orchestras, while players went undocumented from the beginning of the band until their respective record labels made peace with the union one by one a year or two later. People were settling into a new, often suburban lifestyle that, with the advent of television, would soon create serious adjustments in America's social habits. After the war, bandleader Les Brown explained, "Guys came back and settled down with their families, and the ballrooms went to hell. Before the war, every town with 20,000 people had a ballroom. We could spend a month doing one-nighters just in Texas. If the music had done nothing but remain fixed along the lines of its pre-war conventions, these surrounding factors would have made change inevitable. Must know, by the time World War II ended, the world had changed far too much for swing to maintain its popularity." And that completes today's story time. Well, thanks for watching. If you like what I'm doing here, like and subscribe. Donate to my Cash App. Catch me in the next video. And may you find lasting happiness.